When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hey, welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast. I'm Steve, your host for this podcast about the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church. This is what I'm calling episode 1B, St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles. In the introductory episode, I said that I wouldn't take the so-called great man approach or necessarily follow a narrative from the first pope to the current pope. That being said, I think the best way to start is by talking about the founder of the office of Pope of Rome. That is the man St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles. Now I'm calling this episode 1B because this is a part of the remastered History of the Papacy, where it will be like the first episode when this episode first aired, but I'll be including some new information as well and some new thoughts, as well as better audio quality. So definitely keep tuned in. Now back to Peter. Peter played an enormous role in the early history of Christianity. He founded Christian communities all over the area of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Levant, and Syria as well. He installed bishops to lead the communities he founded. Most importantly, he was essentially Jesus' right-hand man. Peter was the leader of the apostles, or main followers of Jesus. Peter was with Jesus in many of the most important scenes in the Bible. Peter will eventually go to Rome and become the leader of the Christian community there, becoming, in effect, the first bishop of Rome. Before we get started, though, one thing to keep in mind is that, as with just about everything else with the papacy, there is much debate about the reliability of sources. The Bible's a major source, along with Origen, Eusebius, the Acts of the Apostles, and the apocryphal Peter, Book of Gospel of Peter, or Acts of Peter. Some of these sources aren't even agreed upon by Catholic scholars. I think that in the end, we have to accept that the sources are not going to be ironclad and that there will be a certain amount of bias, or what we might call flex, in them. Today we'll start off with a brief look at Peter's early life leading up to becoming involved with Jesus' ministry. After that, we can discuss how Peter became so important in early Christianity, and that will lead us into the basis for this idea of primacy of the Roman papacy. Then we can finally begin to discuss why the eventual successors to Peter can claim that they have a special and leading authority over all Christians. The foundation is laid right in the beginning with Peter. So let's begin with Peter's early life. Peter was said to be born in 4 BC, BCE if you prefer, at Bethsaida in the Galilee region. This would make Peter more or less the same age as Jesus. Bethsaida can be translated as the house or place of fishing, which makes sense because Peter was a fisherman by trade and so was his family. The exact location of Bethsaida is not known, but research, especially that done by the University of Nebraska, seems to indicate it was located at the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, which is to the north and eastern corner of the modern state of Israel. It was probably right near the border of where modern-day Syria and Lebanon and Israel all come together. Really not a ton is known about the early life of Peter. He may have lived with a wife and his mother-in-law, and he is said to have had daughters. Peter's wife may have been martyred as well. His father was named Jonas. Therefore, Peter was known as Simon Bar Jonas or Simon Bar Jonah. We'll get into the Jonas differentiation at a later time, though. Now, Bar is the patronym or the son of used commonly in Hebrew. So Simon Bar Jonah, Simon, son of Jonah. Now, speaking, who is Simon? Simon, or Simeon, or Shimon, was Peter's original name. The name Peter came later when Jesus gives Simon that name. Peter is derived from the Greek word for rock or stone, Petra. If you think about words like petrified, meaning turning into stone, or petrified trees, etc., in Hebrew or Aramaic, it would have been Cephas or Cephas. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here and back up just a little bit. Peter also had a brother, Andrew, who was one of the original 12 apostles. Peter was not well educated. I think we can be pretty safe about saying that. But really, that was not very shocking, given that he was a tradesman and born in really a backwater area of Judea. The area of the country he was from was pretty far away geographically and culturally from like the heavy hitter places like Jerusalem and other hot spots. During the life and ministry of Jesus, Peter is basically right beside him during most of the key moments in the Bible. Peter is with Jesus when he's arrested, at the Last Supper, and Jesus' time when he was around after the resurrection. And those are just a few instances. Since I don't intend this podcast to necessarily be a Bible study, I want to lead into the founding of the Bishopric of Rome right now. I will skip most of the details from the various Gospels, but don't worry, though. We'll get into the Bible plenty, and even Peter's place in the Bible, but let's skip ahead of that at this moment. There's so much history in the Bible anyways that we can get into, and we will. The major point is that Peter was without a doubt Jesus' right-hand man. How do we know that Peter was so important to Jesus? Jesus gave Peter a special place amongst his 12 most important earlier followers, and that is why he is known as the Prince of the Apostles. Jesus' earliest and closest followers were known as the 12 Apostles. In future podcasts, I will discuss the importance of the apostles and the apostolic tradition and succession. But here's a really brief overview. There are many biblical reasons for the number 12. There's all sorts of connections to the Old Testament and ancient traditions. The 12 original apostles were Peter, James, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas, son of Jonas, and last, but certainly not least, by a long shot, Judas Iscariot. There is a lot of Jameses, and we'll get into them too in a later episode. Once Judas Iscariot had his eventual falling out, another person was elected by the other apostles to join. All of these apostles or early disciples of Jesus had their own stories and spread the message of Jesus to the farthest reaches of the Roman Empire and far, far beyond. Every bishop in the Roman Catholic, Eastern, and Oriental Orthodox, and with some certain qualifications that I won't even remotely get into at this point, many of the Anglican communities can trace their ordination to one of the 12 apostles. Bishops will become very important, and an entire episode will be devoted to them coming up. So more on bishops later. Just keep in mind that they exist and that they are related to the apostles. The time period of the early first half of the 1st century AD was an incredibly unsettled time in the Eastern Mediterranean world. Rome had conquered vast amount of land in the region around modern-day Israel, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. There were also numerous client kingdoms such as Herod Agrippa and his successors. This is the time of Jesus and the early ministry of the apostles, including Peter. There were many sects of Judaism all debating and arguing theology and how to deal with Hellenism and the encroachment of the Romans. The early Christians were part of a Jewish community that was in great upheaval. Big things were happening all over the place. The Romans were definitely not particularly happy with the way things were going down in this area of their burgeoning empire. This was basically the scene that we find ourselves in the early 1st century AD. The area of Judea was a powder keg of competing, reforming religious factions, establishment religious factions, local kingdoms, and princes, and the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the Roman Empire, all swirling around trying to get an upper hand in this really dynamic corner of the world. The area of Palestine and the Levant would have revolts led by these various Jewish factions for close to 200 years, and basically on and off after that time. This doesn't even count for the revolts that the Jews had had against the Greeks previous to the Romans taking over. Now, there's references all throughout the Bible in which the basis for primacy or leadership of the popes of Rome in regards to the Christian community are based. One of the most important is founded in the Gospel of Matthew, and I will quote one of the passages, and you can feel free to delve more deeply into the New Testament to find some more really fascinating quotes. But this is the quote from Matthew 16:16, which states, "He," Jesus that is, "said to them, 'But who do you say I am?' Simon Peter answered and said, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' Jesus answered and said to him," Peter that is, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, or Jonas, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." This is really the center of it all. This is the quote that the entire Roman papacy and all that it entails is based on. Let's break down that passage just a little bit, though. So this is when Peter is the first person to identify Jesus as the Messiah. That's a pretty big deal right there, and shows that Peter certainly had a major position. Then Jesus changed Simon Bar Jonas's name to Peter and pronounced that he, Jesus that is, will build his church with Peter, and Peter will be the foundation. Peter will spread the word about Jesus all around town. Next, Jesus says that he will give Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Much of the imagery of the popes in later centuries will show them holding the keys of Peter, a gold one and a silver one. Now, the final bit of this passage about the binding and loosing of sins is the last part of the puzzle that will lay the foundations for the claims of primacy of the Roman popes and Petrine succession. The power to get rid of people's sins was given to the 12 apostles, and the 12 apostles were able to pass this power on to their successors, which will lead to the idea of apostolic succession. All the pieces, the binding and the loosing of sins, apostolic succession, and the special role of Peter in the church are now in place. Many of these ideas, of course, will evolve and refocus in future generations, but essentially these few ideas are the very first steps in the future of power and influence of the popes of Rome. It's like the first little, I don't know, there's many metaphors you could say, the first step of 1,000 miles, etc., but it's an essential piece of the equation. Now, the big question that comes up all over Christianity is whether these powers were exclusive to Peter. They almost certainly were not, historically speaking. Were these powers destined to be held exclusively by the leader of the church in the city of Rome proper? Almost certainly not either. If anything, if Petrine supremacy was real and intended to be a doctrine, this power would have been held by the Bishop of Antioch, Peter's first office, the main and most important bishopric of the very earliest Christianity was in Jerusalem, and that was run by James, Jesus' brother, and other family members of Jesus. Jesus' family members, you say? Well, don't worry, we'll get into all of that in due time, too. And now a word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I
off.
praise the man.
K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident that was not your fault, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by to answer your questions for free. Call now and find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-910-7500. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell everyone listening who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me here. It's always nice to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now. 800-910-7500. You'll find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. Take advantage of this opportunity and call now. 800-910-7500.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center, may not be available in all states, not available in California.
Now, after the crucifixion of Jesus, Peter continued to preach and lead and found many communities of early Christians. Community of Christians began to spread around the area of Judea and Rome and Roman Syria and beyond. Peter was arrested by Herod, but by a miracle, according to the Acts of the Apostles, was freed. It doesn't go into much more detail than that, just freed. Peter appoints Paul as a new apostle, specifically to the Gentiles, or the non-Jewish pagan people of the world, I guess you'd say. The heat continued to increase on Peter in Jerusalem, so he headed out and became the first bishop of Antioch, being that he founded that see. Antioch was a pretty big deal. Antioch was easily the third largest city in Rome, the Roman Empire, after Rome and Alexandria and Egypt. Antioch would go on to become a member of the Pentarchy, or 5 most important metropolitan sees of the Christian church. And if you look at our Patreon diptychs, of course, Antioch is one of the levels you can attain, because that was one of the earliest, most important bishoprics of Christianity. This bishopric even exists up until this day, although it has moved to Damascus because Antioch kind of fell on hard times for a spell in late antiquity. So at this very earliest point in the story, Jerusalem had an episcopal see and an episcopal hierarchy. Alexandria and Rome would build one very shortly after, on top of what was happening in Antioch and Jerusalem. And then finally, much later, Constantinople would get one. And basically every town and city in the Roman Empire and beyond would start getting these episcopal structures. At this earliest point, there was not a distinction between Christians and Jews. They were all on a continuum of the Jewish sects of the time, Judaisms as they call it, or Israelite religion. All the sects followed the Mosaic law, but with their own reservations. The Mosaic law, the Halakha as it's called, or the law of Moses, are to this very day the laws that many Jews follow and governs almost every aspect of their daily lives. 2 of the most commonly known laws that you might have heard of are circumcision and the dietary laws known as the kashrut or kosher laws. There are over 300 other laws as well. Essentially, the early Christians were Jewish. So in every way possible, the earliest Christians were, of course, Second Temple Jews. A Jew in the Second Temple period had a grand buffet of ideas they could pick and choose and pass on. The differences between the various sects of Second Temple Judaism were quite stark, close to bordering on what you might say were different religions. I mean, these differences were so fundamental. Now, at this point in the story, Peter, as we move on, Peter would participate in the very first church council, that of the Council of Jerusalem, before he went to Rome. All of the heavy hitters of the time attended this Council of Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, though, Peter was not the chair of the council, but instead Jesus' brother James, or James the Just, or James the Just One, as he was known, led the council. We'll have a whole future podcast devoted to this first council, but essentially it was decided that Gentile pagans could be full members of the Christian church without committing to the entirety of the Mosaic Law. In my opinion, this is kind of one of the first steps, and it's not just my opinion, of course, that Judaism, as we know it today, started to separate from Christianity. And if you look, the rabbinical Judaism that we call Judaism today really wouldn't start to develop until the 500-600 CE. So quite some time after this, and some of the things that would make it into, say, the Mishnah or the Talmud are even reactions to defining how rabbinical Judaism is different from Christianity. So there's a lot of mixing and overlap and conflict that will play out over the centuries. But let's get back to the point at hand. Jewish Christians, people who followed the law in its entirety, but also felt that Jesus in some way was the Messiah or the Christos or something, they existed for a long time after this time as well. The final part of Peter's journey was he went to Rome. Believe it or not, there is not a lot of detail of why he went to Rome or for how long he preached there. There are apocryphal resources and some much later sources. There are some intriguing archaeological sources that say Peter actually did go to Rome and was buried there. Excavations deep under St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican have found remains from this time period wrapped in a purple burial shroud, which match very closely to descriptions about Peter's burial garb from his contemporary time. It is said that Peter became caught up in the persecutions that occurred under Nero. Nero blamed the burning of Rome on the early Christian sect. Now, we could go down many roads with this one, and the dates are in dispute, but one really interesting take on the persecutions of Nero is put out by Stephen Dando Collins in his book, The Great Fire of Rome. He essentially says that it was the cult of Isis that was being persecuted, not the Christians. It's very possible Nero would have scapegoated any group that he could to push the blame off from himself for the fire. I'm willing to say that it is possible that the Christians were not the main object of blame for the fire, but they certainly could have easily gotten caught up in the persecutions, along with any group of outsiders, people who were viewed to be foreigners. So that could be Egyptians or other people from the Middle East or even Anatolia. But essentially, all of the probable dates for Peter's death put it in the neighborhood of the Neronian persecutions. Some say he was martyred in 55 AD CE. Others say 64, and still others say 67. There's evidence to support all of these claims. Two interesting stories that came out around the death of Peter, though, are worth examining. One is that he wanted to be crucified upside down, as not to be crucified in the same manner as Jesus. Another fascinating story is the story of Quo Vadis, or Quo Vadis, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This story relates that when Peter found out that he was going to be crucified, he started to head out of Rome in order to not be crucified. And this all ties into stories in the Gospels where Peter was said to have denied Jesus 3 times. One would have been in the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane, that's always a hard one to pronounce. Another one was actually during the whole crucifixion, and then there's still one more. So 3 times Peter denies Jesus, and then we get the story where Peter's given a chance for a 4th time to deny Jesus, but then on Peter's way as he's starting to head out of town, Peter sees Jesus walking in from the other direction, and Peter asked Jesus, Quo vadis, Domine, or where are you going, Lord? Jesus said that he was going back to Rome to be crucified yet again. After that, Peter turned around and was crucified. True or not, these are really, really incredible stories and shed much light on early Christianity and the history of the church, especially what was going on in Rome. And it says a lot about the character of Peter as well. And I wonder what the authors of this story were trying to get across with Peter, that even up until the very end, he was a flawed character, but then he does come along. I don't know. That one's definitely up for discussion. So I'd love to hear what you think by either emailing me or putting some comments down below. Simon Peter really strikes me as a fascinating and human character. He got angry, he made mistakes, and he didn't always live up to his best ideals. In the Bible and in the various sources, you really get a feeling of who Peter really was. This right here is probably as good a time as any to just wrap up this episode. There's so much more to be said, but the basic building blocks are in place. We will continue to look at the very beginnings of the Christian church and how the office of the Bishop of Rome will be developed and evolved during this early period. Upcoming, I would eventually, and this is remastered, so we're like 9 years afterwards going on, 8-9 years afterwards, I still have a plan to do an episode on the overview of the archaeology of finding Peter's tomb in the Vatican. That could be a good one for the history of the papacy in 10 minutes, YouTube exclusives, or we might do a full-blown episode on it. I'm not sure yet. Hopefully I'll get to that at some point very soon, and you can let me know if you want that episode. So I hope you've enjoyed today's remastered episode. I'd like to thank all of our patrons on patreon.com/history of the papacy. Go there to find a great way to support the show. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, you know I'd always love to hear them. Send me a tweet, a Facebook message, or an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com. And I will talk to you next time.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I
off.
praise the man.
K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Hello, I'm David Jeremiah. When we look at America at 250 years, we do so with gratitude, with honesty, and above all, with hope. Because our hope has never rested in human strength alone. Our hope is in the Lord. There is hope for America when we remember God, when we take responsibility for the way we live, and when we walk in truth. There is hope for America because the Bible assures us that God is still sovereign and He still rules over the nations. So let us look to God with faith for our nation's future. Let us thank Him for His blessings in the past. And let us ask Him to guide this nation in the years to come. May He continue to bless America.